Today, we want to discuss one of the most complicated stories of our time, maybe, Iran and its future. It's a very sophisticated topic, but I'm quite sure that our guests are the best to help us to understand what is happening in Iran and what might come next. I think we all agree that what happened in the region in the last couple of years changed the region significantly. It seems that the region came out of the shadow wars, sanctions, and decades of negotiations and diplomacy, which were mostly unsuccessful. And we entered a new phase, a phase of open confrontation. I think many Iranians are now thinking, what will come next? Was that the peak of confrontation, the 12-day war, or they should be still waiting for more surprises? And we know the world in which we live is very different from, let's say, even 10 years ago. We see the rise of China as not only as an economic power, but also as a military power. We see the rise of Russia in a way that we see that its expansionist policy we see in Europe. So I guess the question is not what happens next. It also how much all these players have control on what will happen next. So to start that, I would like Mr. Abrams to start with you, and then later Mr. Ross. I want to bring the Iranian people to this panel right from the top. The result of a survey was announced yesterday, in which 26% of Iranians believe it's likely to see a war with Israel in coming weeks or months. 34% believe a war is very likely. That means that in total, 60% of Iranians believe there might be a war with Israel in coming weeks or months. Do you think that concerns is valid?
No. First, I'm delighted to be with you and to be here at Iran International. I don't. I think first that the people ruling Iran learned from their attack on Israel that it wasn't a very good idea. That what was the product militarily? The product was to lose most of their air defenses, to lose most of their nuclear program, and then to have an attack by the United States that eliminated a lot of the rest of their nuclear program. This was not a great idea. And they are the ones who decided to move from the shadow war into a direct hit at Israel. I don't think they will be particularly tempted to do that because, again, lacking air defenses, they know that a great deal more damage can be done by Israel. And I don't think the Israelis are looking for it right now either. They're having gotten the hostages back from Gaza. They need to let their military rest, rebuild, rearm. It's mostly a reserve military, so people want to go home and continue with their families and their jobs. So I would be quite surprised, actually, to see war, with one exception. If the regime in Tehran decides we must as quickly as possible, rebuild the nuclear program, then they're going to get hit again. I don't know if you want to call that war, but that nuclear program cannot be rebuilt. And if they try to rebuild it, they're inviting an Israeli or American strike.
Yeah, what do you think, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, I'd love to disagree, but I agree. Look, the fact is, Iran has no air defense today. They spent probably $500 billion developing a nuclear infrastructure, and most of that's been destroyed. They are telling a narrative. One of the reasons I think that the percentage, the 60%, exists in Iran, because the regime is telling a narrative that we won the war. that it was the Israelis who had to stop the war, that the Americans had to come in and rescue them. They have created a story to convince the public that somehow they've won. I suspect the public knows better and is fearful, but given what the regime is saying, that's why I think you see those poll numbers. But I agree with Elliott. If they were to rush for a nuclear weapon right now, that would invite either an Israeli response or an American one. And I'm quite certain that the Iranian leadership knows better than that. First of all, the idea when I hear people here say they might be able to sneak out, they may be able to do it in a covert way. Having lost the top of their military, having seen the top of the Revolutionary Guard killed as well, having had 12 nuclear scientists killed, all of these people were in what they thought were secure and vulnerable locations. The Iranian leadership doesn't know what the Israelis know. Today they don't know it. And there's no way they're about to run that risk. I don't need to tell you, this is a regime that can't provide electricity even though they produce natural gas and oil. This is a regime that has incredible water shortages. This is a regime where one of the major banks just failed. It has devalued currency. It's failing on almost every measure. And the policies of the supreme leader, investing huge amounts in nuclear infrastructure, investing in a regional proxy network, most of which has now been destroyed or dramatically weakened, it doesn't make a lot of sense to throw more good money after bad. And I suspect right now where we are with the regime, talk tough, talk bravely, but recognize the reality is the last thing you need is another fight with the Israelis, and you need even less of one with the United States.
Mr. Abrams, you were Iran envoy and Venezuela envoy under President Trump's administration in the first term. Do you agree with this triumphant rhetoric from Trump? It seems that he sounds like the war has ended victoriously. The way he described it, that Iran was a dark cloud over the Middle East that now has been lifted. Iran was a bully, that it can't bully anyone anymore. So is it a premature celebration, or Iran dossier has successfully ended?
It's premature. It's exaggerated. It's exaggerated, meaning there is something there. He's just making too much of it. Dennis, mentioned, for example, the regional question, the proxies like Hezbollah, which are so damaged now. So when Trump, let me put it this way, if you look at the Middle East today, look at the Iranian influence in the Middle East today versus 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's much diminished. It's a real change. And I think Trump is right to draw attention to that. It's an important change. Now, to go further and say, it's the end of conflict and peace in our... No, that goes too far. The regime is still there. Their military is still powerful. They have a dangerous ballistic missile program. So to say the problems are solved would be wrong, is wrong, and I think Trump overstates it. But the changes have been very significant.
Yeah, so what is this? I can see that both of you disagree that there will be a second round of war anytime soon. And also, you believe that the celebration is premature. So what is the middle? So what the Trump administration should do as the next policy?
Well, I want to add to what Elliott was saying, because there's a perspective here that needs to be kept in mind. Yes, it's an exaggeration, for sure. But something very important was done, and the most important thing that was done is Iran has lost its sense of impunity, and it had that. We had Republican and Democratic administrations alike that took very seriously the Iranian threats. If you hit us, we'll set the region on fire. And in many respects, we self-deterred because of that. Now, you made the point earlier, which is right, that it's the Iranians who basically crossed the threshold when they attacked Israel on April 1, 2024. And then they did it again in October. Now, they did that because they thought they had a kind of impunity from us. And what Trump did, following up on what the Israelis did, I mean, the Israelis made it safe for us to do it because they took out all the air defense. But what he did is he signaled, you don't have impunity any longer. Now that was really important for the region because it said, okay, we really don't have to be so afraid of the Iranians anymore. And given the weakness of what's happened to the regional proxies, we were not really going to be intimidated by them either. So that is a very significant strategic development, but it's incomplete. And this is a regime that is focused on its survival. It always has been, but that's the first priority. It feels it can manage and sustain control, which is another reason why they're not looking for trouble on the outside right now, because that could actually endanger them more on the inside. But it's very important that they need to understand if Iran's to have a future, it has to deal differently with everyone. And that's where this is still incomplete. You know, can we produce regime change from the outside? I've never been a big believer in that. Regime change needs to come in Iran, but it needs to come from within. The question is, what are the kind of things we can be supportive of? Or if it's not going to be regime change, what kind of behaviors do we have to see from Iran that makes it operate in a way that's more acceptable?
So Tulsi Gabbard, a few days ago, the director of national intelligence, she said in Manama summit that the era of regime change and democracy promotion has ended, and Trump doesn't believe in that. So do you agree that Trump doesn't follow that policy in the case of Iran, and it's all about prosperity, for example, the way she put it?
I do think that he is not democracy promotion. He says explicitly, it's not just what she has said. He said when he went to Saudi Arabia, you know, we're not going to tell others about, you know, how they should organize themselves. He's a believer more in transactions than he is in the promotion of a particular set of values. He does, I think, want to promote a Middle East where prosperity becomes a defining characteristic. By the way, that's not a terrible objective to want. I mean, a region that is characterized by that is not focused on coercing its neighbors, subverting its neighbors. Rather, it's engaging with its neighbors. So I think that's good. I would say I happen to be a believer that American values are pretty important and that what America stands for is important and that others should look to us as an example. That's not a hallmark of this administration. So I'm able to divide parts of what I see the administration doing that I think are producing favorable outcomes from what I'd like to see us represent and stand for.
Yeah. I want to stay with Trump. I know it's taking a long time, but I think he might be the biggest player here. I think he has surprised many of his supporters and critics. Many said he will come and make a bad deal with Iran. He's a deal maker. He will do anything for a photo op. Even a few months ago in DC, there were lots of op-eds in newspapers that they were warning against a bad deal. Well, he didn't sign a bad deal. And there were supporters who said he's an isolationist, he will never use military force against Iran. Right. Well, he did. And then there were people who would say he's a tough guy. He will come and do the same thing that he did with Qasem Soleimani. He will do the same with the supreme leader and might eliminate him. Now we know that he might even have saved the supreme leader. So what is the core principle among these policies, and if there is any, how can it help us to understand his next move?
He's not an isolationist. Pardon me. I think that's an important misunderstanding. The killing of Soleimani is an example of it, but what he does not want and what his followers do not want is a repeat of the Afghanistan or Iraq experiences for the U.S., meaning hundreds of thousands of troops, trillions of dollars, many Americans killed and wounded for a benefit that is hard for many Americans to understand. He's not going to do that. But that does not mean he's an isolationist. We see him going all around the world and meeting with everyone from Putin to Xi Jinping to all the European leaders. I mean, in fact, I think some of his followers probably criticize him for spending too much time on international affairs and not enough time on the domestic economy. He's not an isolationist. He wants to avoid those kinds of wars, but it doesn't lead him to turn away from U.S. power. We saw it in Soleimani. We saw it with the Iranian nuclear sites. We see it now in the Caribbean. So that misunderstanding, people should simply disabuse themselves.
But he doesn't want those types of wars like Iraq and Afghanistan because they failed. But
it's more than failure. It's the cost. It's the cost-benefit analysis. I think for him, but for millions and millions of Americans, you look at the cost and benefit in Afghanistan, it's partly because the Taliban is back, but it's partly just Americans saying, and why do I care? It's Afghanistan. So it's complicated, but I think, to go back to your question, he's not an isolationist, he's a nationalist. He does view these things in transactional terms, but what is the purpose of the transaction? The purpose is to make America stronger, safer, richer. That's how he views each of these, which means that he downplays, as Dennis was just saying, much more than he would like or I would like, the values questions such as democracy and human rights. And he downplays much more than I think is wise, alliances. Because I think alliances are more important than he thought. He seems to be changing his tune now on NATO and speaking much more positively about NATO and about Japan and Australia than he was in his first term. So maybe he's coming around on this. But when he looks at Iran, he sees a hopelessly hostile regime. Death to America, death from 1979 to 2025, death to America. And our friends in the region, Israel, the Saudis, the Emiratis. He sees what Iranian foreign policy looks like today. And it looks like hostility. It looks like to us and to our friends. So with such a foreign policy, there can be no deals.
Mr. Ambassador, you have served several U.S. administrations. You've been deeply involved in peace negotiations in the Middle East and in Europe. How do you see that Trump might be able to resolve the Iranian issue? The containment and diplomacy that you mentioned, most U.S. presidents have faced the same problem, and I think we can say that none of them could find a solution for that. How do you see the next phase of diplomacy? I mean, I think you both said that there won't be any war, but what's the chance of diplomacy? Is there any hope of any point of convergence? We know the conditions that Trump has put totally unacceptable for Iranians, and the supreme leader of Iran recently set their conditions that the U.S. should stop support of Israel and they should evacuate all their bases from the region. With those sets of conditions, is there any hope for diplomacy?
Well, the short answer is, if those are real conditions, the answer is no. I mean, it's one of the things that has characterized the supreme leader, and you know this for a very long time, is that he regards negotiations with us as a threat. He doesn't see them as an opportunity, he sees them as a threat. Because even agreements raise questions about the essence, the ideology of the regime. So he's always been, even when he's gone along, even when he went along with the JCPOA, you'll see that he was still critical, still skeptical, because not to be would somehow question the construct that he has presented as to what the Islamic Republic represents. When he poses these kinds of conditions, he knows it would be the equivalent of America redefining who it is. And I agree that, by the way, that with Elliott, that President Trump is not an isolationist. but I would characterize him a little differently. He's a unilateralist. He's more favorable in what he says about alliances right now, but his instinct on alliances is that they cost us more than they provide us. And obligations bind us in ways he'd like freedom of action. He wants to be able to pursue as any course that he deems at the moment to be the right course. Would he do a deal with the Iranians? Yes, he would do a deal with the Iranians. But he's not about to surrender to the Iranians. And the Supreme Leader poses conditions that would make any kind of an agreement impossible. My own assumption was, after the 12-day war in June, there could be no early diplomacy because it would be too much of an admission of defeat on the Iranian side. It would be too much of a humiliation for the Supreme Leader. But I'm also struck by what I see, by what I wowould call maybe some of those who are more professional in the Iranian elite, who are actually raising questions about, well, gee, we spent all this money with these proxies, and what did it get us? I mean, these are questions that are going to percolate there. And for the near term, the Supreme Leader tries to manage it. But I do think, I wouldn't be shocked if we see, 6 months from now, more of an interest coming from the Iranians about looking for something with us. The problem is they need sanctions lifted. They got snapback. That doesn't serve their interests, doesn't serve their needs. So I'm not excluding the possibility, because the truth is, in the end, Trump still sees himself as a deal maker. And the less a deal is expected, the more it's attractive to him, because then he surprises everybody. Now, for that, you need a partner. And right now, he doesn't have a partner.
I was just going to say, I think this is among the important points you've made. There are a lot of people in Washington who have said for years and years, we have to offer the Supreme Leader, and let's open an embassy and trade and investment and delegate. This is the last thing he wants. This is the last thing he has ever wanted, because, as you said, that's a change in the nature of the regime. Yeah. So those who offer that are going to be rejected.
The last time that they lifted the sanctions in 2016, he labeled that economic infiltration.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So,
but he's also, the Supreme Leader has presided over unmistakable failure. And you can present it however you want, but you can't hide it. And he can't hide it from the public, which obviously has been alienated anyway. I'm not sure he can hide it even from major parts of the elite. I don't think you see change in Iran before the Supreme Leader goes. I think he will resist any change. But I will just say this. As a general principle, authoritarian regimes are most vulnerable during periods of succession, because the rules aren't clearly established, and because there becomes a competition within the elite. And some of that elite seeks to gain legitimacy by appealing to the public. And when you expand that kind of competition that way, that's when you really begin to threaten the regime.
So both sides are dragging their feet to start the negotiations. Both sides seem to be relaxed at this stage, but I think we have an anxious player, which is Israel. I think they might think that the window of opportunity to end the case of Iran might be just 3 years until the Trump term ends. I think it seems that they are anxious about Iran rebuilding its missile capabilities. We see 2,000 tons of perchlorate sodium came to Iran, and we all agree that that wasn't for celebration of fireworks at the end of the year. And we hear that Iran is trying to rebuild its proxies. So I think Israel might feel that Iran will benefit from this delay. What do you think, Mr. Massad?
Well, I would say there are those in Israel who are extremely mindful and are vigilant of this. One of the things I would say, I do think there needs to be a kind of understanding between the Israelis and President Trump on what would be a legitimate trigger. Rebuilding the air defense, he's not going to see as a legitimate trigger. Any move on rebuilding the nuclear, he would see as being a legitimate trigger. I think the gray area are the ballistic missiles, where from an Israeli standpoint, the ballistic missiles represent a real threat. And they, I think, will feel there's a point at which they don't want to see it go beyond a certain level. I don't know where the president is. I don't know where the Trump administration is on that. But I would say I think it's very important for them to reach an understanding on that. I'm not sure that's the focal point of their discussions. Actually, I'm quite sure it's not the focal point of discussions right now. Now they're very much focused on the Trump 20-point plan and how do you get Hamas disarmed? What's the process of demilitarization and how does that relate to reconstruction? Where does Israeli withdrawal from Gaza fit into that nexus? How soon will you see a board of peace and an international stabilization force put on the ground, and what will its missions be? This is the preoccupation right now of, I think, the administration, because after all, we've seen a stream of visitors. Since the president was there, you have Witkoff and Jared Kushner there, then you have the vice president, then you have the secretary of state, then you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, then you have Witkoff's deputy. I mean, there's been a constant stream of visitors designed to try to ensure that the ceasefire doesn't fall apart, that you begin to get this process underway. The administration presented to the Security Council yesterday a draft resolution. So that's where their focus is more than on Iran. The Israelis may be watching this, but I'm not seeing an engagement with the administration on the Iranian issue right now.
I would only add to, I agree, but, and then Lebanon and Syria, which are also occupying the attention of many of the same people and which are really in flux right now. What will the relationship between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah be? How constrained will Hezbollah be? What will happen in Syria? We know President Bashar is rumored to be coming soon to the United States in the month of November. So there's a lot of attention on that, and I think that's right, that Iran is not the center of attention right now.
I agree. It seems that Iran it's slipped down on the priority list.
Yeah.
I think Trump is more focused on Middle East peace and also Ukraine war and China.
Yeah.
And I think maybe he believes he can find a final solution to Iran with these new global order, let's say. How optimistic are you that he might reach a deal with President Xi or Putin and resolve the Iranian issue through that new global order?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I will say for a long time I've had a degree of anxiety about Putin coming to President Trump and saying, I can fix the Iran problem for you, but here's what I need from you on Ukraine to do it. I'm hopeful that that's not something that will have the same appeal that it might have had several months ago, partly because Putin, in a sense, so far, has every single time he's engaged with the president in the aftermath of it, he's done exactly the opposite of what the president thought he would do. That's produced for the first time sanctions from us in this administration. Does it make him more skeptical of Putin? I don't know. But I'd be worried about it. I wouldn't mind a conversation with President Xi where the president says to President Xi, you're helping the Iranians to rebuild their ballistic missile program. The two of us should have no interest in a renewal of war between Israel and Iran, but that's going to make war much more likely. Why are you doing that? Do you really want to make war more likely? Do you really want to have the Middle East explode? I'm not seeing that at this point, but I would like to see us do something like that. I will tell you, I had my own experience. I was sent by President Obama in the fall of 2009 to Beijing. And the purpose at that time was to convince them to join us in much more rigorous sanctions against the Iranian nuclear program. And I went and I said, you may think that the U.S. influence on Israel is such that if we tell the Israelis not to strike Iran, that they won't do it. But if you think that's the case and they see an existential threat, they will not listen to us. they view an existential threat. There's a reason the Jewish state exists, and it's not to go through another Holocaust. So they will do whatever they think is necessary. But I can tell you, they believe it's possible to get Iran to change its behavior if you raise the economic price high enough to them. So we should have a common interest in being able to do that. Well, we actually did see the Chinese join us in Security Council Resolution 1929 in the aftermath of that. So I do think it's possible to appeal to the Chinese on the basis of this is actually in their interest, and what they're doing right now could make a resumption of the war between Iran and Israel much more likely.
But we don't see that consensus anymore. I mean, we saw that during the snapback process, and we see China is still buying more than like 1.5 million barrels of oil. Like, it seems that unanimous decision that we saw in 2010, I think we don't see that anymore.
Well, one of the reasons we don't see it is because, in a sense, we've not sought to raise the price to the Chinese of what they're doing.
Yeah,
there's two ways to, there's pressure that is more coercive, and there's pressure that is related to more inducements. It would be possible with the Chinese to make it clear, look, here's what we have to gain by cooperating on this, but here's what you have to lose by not doing so.
But if you go back to the George W. Bush administration, we had a whole bunch of Iran, I think 6 Iran resolutions in the Security Council, unanimous, all unanimous. Russia, China, US, no enrichment, for example, by Iran. This is not that world. And I think the Chinese have made a decision that the most important thing in the world to them is ending the period of American dominance. So more important than their relations with Iran, or why do they want Iran to get a nuclear weapon? Why is it good for China, for Iran to get a nuclear? It's not. It does nothing. Yet they won't try to stop it. Why not? Because I think from their point of view, if that's an American goal, they're against it. So we need to try, and I think the President does try in some of these negotiations, to persuade President Xi to get out of that mindset. But I think it is, for Xi and for Putin, their fundamental mindset. The Americans are the problem. American influence, American power should be diminished wherever it can be. And that explains a lot of their attitude toward Iran. Why does Russia want Iran to get a nuclear weapon? I would say they don't really, but as long as it's an American issue in the middle, they'll be on Iran's side, or we say Iran, but the side of the regime.
Thank you. We will take some questions from the audience soon, but before that, I had just 2 more questions. The first one is from Ambassador Ross. You mentioned the threat of a nuclear Iran.
Yeah.
I want to give the example of Iraq and Israel attack on Iraq nuclear facilities in 1981.
Yeah.
It was a successful operation. It was celebrated by many countries. But only a decade later, the world found out that it only made the Iraqi nuclear program more underground. The documents showed later that it even made Saddam Hussein more determined to go after the bomb. Before that, it was just a side project, but after that, he said, okay, put all the money there, we are going for the bomb. We see the same unity among the Iranian elite that we must go for the bomb. I think my question is, did the world, and especially Israel, learn from Iraq example, or we might see the same scenario happen again?
I think this was so different in one respect, because in the case of Iraq, you had a single facility. Here you had an infrastructure that's been built up over 40 years. And the idea that Iran wasn't going for a nuclear weapon, I think, was fanciful. You don't build this kind of an infrastructure. You certainly don't enrich to 60% unless, and you don't run some of the experiments, including using nuclear initiators. You don't do that unless you're serious about wanting weapons. So I think that the problem here with those who say, well, now that Israel's done this, now that you're going to drive the Iranians to a bomb, That's what they were doing before Israel did this. So what Israel has done is set back dramatically this, and they've raised the price to them of thinking they could try to somehow do it secretly, because they can have no confidence that whatever they're doing, the Israelis don't know.
Mr. Elliott, you were U.S. envoy for Venezuela as well under Trump. I think when we talk about military intervention, regime change, it's not just about Iran, it's also about Venezuela, also recently, and I believe many in Iran closely are watching what's going to happen to Venezuela, because that can be a model that might unfold later in Iran. You said Trump is not an isolationist.
Yep.
How much do you think, what's the chance of Trump starting a military attack against Maduro government and even a regime change there?
I think the chances that he will strike in Venezuela rather than just in international waters are very high. I think you have this amazing armada that has been assembled, including an aircraft carrier task force. I don't think the end of this will be hitting 12 or 20 little speedboats carrying narcotics. And I think there are many people in the administration who think that success here would be the fall of the regime. So they've taken a risk because the fall of the regime is not assured. But I don't think they're going to stop where they are as you and I are talking. There are plenty of relevant targets in Venezuela. Some of these narcotics boats, after all, that come from Venezuela, can be hit in port rather than in the Caribbean Sea. Airstrips that carry narcotics up through the islands to the United States can be hit. So that is my expectation for the next step. Now, will that bring down the regime? Uncertain.
Thank you very much. We can take some questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. It's a fantastic conversation. I have an opinion about the likelihood of the next round of war between Iran and Israel, and I would like to have your take on that. I think that after what happened to Israel on October 7, the Jewish state understands that the threat against its existence is not just from Iran's nuclear capabilities, but rather the proxies as well. What Hamas did to Israel, I think it was a wake-up call for Israel that the Iranian regime's proxies also pose an existential threat to the Jewish states. For example, right now, as we are speaking, Iran is smuggling its ballistic missiles into the Iraqi territory, which is much closer to the state of Israel than Iran. Hezbollah is rebuilding its arsenal once again, and the Yemeni Houthis are stronger than they have ever been before. And Iran is getting help from China and North Korea rebuilding their nuclear arsenal. And I have read somewhere that based on the materials that they are getting, they will be able to build around 2,000 ballistic missiles. And why they're doing that? Because they want to have a guarantor for their nuclear enrichment once again. Is Israel is going to wait until Iran or its proxies are going to knock on their door? Is Israel going to wait? Or they have learned their lesson and they're going to preemptively prevent Iran from rearming proxies and rebuilding its nuclear program? That's my question.
Well, good question. Look, if you read the Israeli press right now, the Israeli press is focused very heavily on what's going on in Lebanon, specifically related to what they see as efforts by Hezbollah to rebuild. There are warnings being made that Israel may have to carry out a much more serious operation against what's going on. I see those warnings or threats as being more of an effort to get the Lebanese government to use the Lebanese army to do what they're supposed to do in terms of disarming Hezbollah. I suspect that these threats, it's not that they're unreal, but they're probably not immediate, but they're an indication that if nothing is done, at a certain point, Israel will do something that's more dramatic. Again, on the one hand, I think the Trump administration wants to succeed in Lebanon with this government carrying out the promises they made about disarming Hezbollah. So it's probably not unhelpful to the administration for the Israelis to make those threats. At a certain point, threats that aren't acted on lose their credibility. So we'll have to see. But at least because the issues become more prominent, one way or the other, something's going to happen. Either we'll see something done more by the Lebanese, or I suspect we'll see the Israelis act. Now, it's not going to be a replay of what they were doing exactly, but it means they'll hit more extensively in Lebanon than they have been hitting. Right now, if you look at Israel's behavior in the context of the ceasefire, they have very targeted, they go after specific Hezbollah operatives or sites where they see an effort to rebuild. They might do something that's a little bit more expansive than only one or two targets.
Thank you so much for a fantastic talk. I have two questions. One is that in 2 weeks, Saudi Prince MBS is going to be in DC. And how do you think Saudis and Qataris and some other Arab states are going to play a role in what comes next for Iran, instead of sitting back and let Russia, China, US decide? And specifically, MBS is going to play any role in that for the future of Iran and what's going on the ground in the region. The second question I have is, in the recent interview of 60 Minutes, President Trump said, Iran wants to make a deal, but you're not talking about it. And you said any negotiation seems like a humiliation to Khamenei. So is there any possibility some in the regime, especially IRGC oligarchs, wants to do anything against Khamenei maybe? And how would that play out? Who would Trump wants to negotiate next if he decides to negotiate with anyone in the regime? Thank you.
Let me, on the Saudis and MBS, he's a very intelligent ruler looking out for his country's interests. He's not going to take on Iran without the United States. He has to assess what's happening in this region. Where is American power and the willingness to use that power, up or down? A couple of years ago, he made an apparent agreement with Iran, again, apparently brokered by China. Why? Because it was a moment of American weakness, I would say. And in fact, there was that attack on the Saudi sites. Yes, yeah. and that's the largest petroleum production site. And what did the United States do to help him, to protect him, to revenge? Nothing. So, you draw a conclusion from that. You draw a different conclusion in November 2025. But I think for the Saudis, for the Emiratis, for the Qataris, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, it's a matter of judging what are the risks and what are the rewards for my country. And the risks and rewards are set by this balance, largely, almost entirely, I would say, between the United States and Iran. The United States, with its bases throughout the region, is the controlling factor for them. Would they like to see the regime fall? I think they would, maybe with the exception of Qatar, but maybe not even that exception. Yes, they would like to see a much different, much less aggressive regime that is not trying to build proxies all over the region. But they know that this really depends, not entirely, but largely on the U.S.
Yeah, I'll just reinforce that point. MBS has been seeking a defense treaty or a defense agreement with us.
Yeah.
Against whom? Iran. He wants to focus everything on an internal agenda, and he wants to be sure there isn't a threat. And the threat is an Iranian threat. So if he felt completely comfortable about Iran, he wouldn't necessarily feel this or feel the need for it. He's going to come here week after next, and by all accounts, there's going to be an announcement. It won't be a defense treaty, but it'll be a defense agreement that looks a lot like what the Qataris got, which is by the way, it's an executive decision, but it's still an executive order. It's still a very significant commitment. I mean, it looks a lot like Article 5 of NATO. We will immediately consult against any threat. We'll be prepared to support and act, including with the use of military support. So this is, I think, pretty significant that the Qataris got it. Now, they got it after the Israeli strike. Now the Saudis are going to get it. And in some ways, it kind of relates to your second question. The more it becomes clear to the Iranians that there's an American umbrella, a security umbrella over these states, it raises the cost to the Iran of threatening them. But I would say you've had a completely failed policy. You built up these proxies. Okay, there's some effort to build them again, but all those proxies are so dramatically weaker than they were, and all the money that was put in to that is down the drain. And what, you're going to continue to follow that failed policy when you have all these domestic needs? I think there are those in Iran who will actually like to do a deal with us. I just don't include the Supreme Leader as one of them.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Yeah, we have one more.
My question is for Ambassador Ross. I need to mention I had a pleasure to be one of your students at Georgetown University, and I'm so glad for being here. In one of your statements in 2012 in Washington Institute, you mentioned that the goal for United States, it should be to not live with a nuclear Iran, and the goal should be to prevent Iran. My question is now, 12 years later, how do you see that statement and where the U.S. is standing right now?
Well, first, I'm really glad that you pay so much attention to what I've said and written over the years. Look, my attitude all along has been, you start by preventing the behaviors that you want to ensure never happen. I said, look, the focus on the issue of regime change is something that never attracted me because it's really hard to manage regime change from the outside. And our track record isn't very good. So when I focused then on the issue of changing their behavior or preventing them from engaging in what I see as bad behaviors, that's still where I would put the priority. Would I support those on the inside of Iran, who want to change Iran? I certainly understand why they should want to. I would love to see, I'd like to see some sign that there would be a reason to believe that opposition in Iran can be successful. But I have to say, I look at the opposition that exists to Iran on the outside, and they can't unify themselves. If you can't unify yourself on the outside, and it's very hard to create an opposition on the inside, for me, I'm going to keep the focus on stopping bad Iranian behaviors and trying to raise the cost to them of engaging those bad behaviors.
Mr. Abrams, what do you think about that? Because we talked about all players here, but one of the most successful players has been Iranian people. So because we see that how they defied the Iranian government, now they defied hijab, they came to the streets, and they have created change despite the resistance from the Iranian government. How much hope do you think? I know that you've been very much focused on communities and support. How much do you think that the Iranian people can be the source of that change?
I think they can. I think they will. I think Iranians never chose this regime in 1979 and have been struggling against it ever since and rising up every few years against it. I think the desires of the vast majority of Iranians are clear. We have an obligation, I think, on the outside, living in democratic countries, to make our support known, moral support, political support, some material support, for example, help on communicating with the world, reaching the outside world. And I think it is inevitable that change will come to Iran. I think we're not able to draw up. But we saw the Soviet Union, a great superpower, collapse on a timetable no one understood. I think change in Iran, given its young, vibrant, educated youth population, it is a very young population. They want change, they're going to get change. I wish it were tomorrow. Maybe it's not tomorrow. But I'm absolutely persuaded it is inevitable.
Okay. Can I just add just to that point? Because you mentioned the Soviet Union. I see real parallels between the Soviet Union in 1980, 81, 82, and Iran today. Nobody in the Soviet Union at that time believed in the ideology. The only people who used the ideology were those who depended upon it for power. The next generation, even of the children of those in power, didn't believe in it, were alienated from it. You look at Iran today, nobody believes in the ideology. So you have this huge gulf between a leadership that is focused exclusively on preserving itself and a public that, interesting enough, is defying it in ways. Mm-hmm. The hijab being the best example. This was, for the supreme leaders, this is one of the pillars of the regime. And the regime may be confident they can manage and they can put down and suppress protests and the like, but it's pretty clear they don't want to invite them. If they did, we'd see them acting against the defiance of wearing the hijab, and they're not. So that tells you something. And I agree, I don't want to be in a position where we are encouraging people to rise up when we're not going to do anything for them. That's a mistake. But we do have to find ways to be supportive of them if they do. I go back to where we were in 2009 in June, and I wish the Obama administration had been more vocal than it was. One of the reasons we weren't at the time is because we were in contact with people from the inside who were saying, don't do things because we're already being accused of being your agents. But we had people on the outside from who were in Europe and elsewhere who were saying, now's the time when you need to be doing more. And we opted for the first course, and in my own judgment, in the aftermath, I said, we should have done more.
I want to thank all of you for being with us. Thanks for your insightful questions, and thanks for your thoughtful answers. Please thank our guests for spending time with us. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much. It was really nice.